every single night. Somewhere on a dark and empty highway, a trucker witnesses something he will never report. What if that something was watching you next? Welcome to Deep Fears. The stories you're about to hear are 100% real. Only names, routes, and personal details have been changed to protect the people who lived them. Before we begin, drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. It matters more than you think. Let's get into it. Engine. Just the engine. No music yet. The salt flat stretches out ahead. White. Endless. Wrong. 31 years on the road, and the only rule that ever kept me sane was this. If something feels off, it is off. Don't investigate. Don't slow down. Don't be the man in the movie who walks toward the noise. I broke that rule once. Just once. And I have spent 12 years trying to understand what I let into my cab that night. It was late June. 2 in the morning, maybe 10 minutes past. I was westbound on I-80 through the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. That long, dead, perfectly flat stretch where the world stops looking real even in daylight. At night, it's something else entirely. The salt reflects your headlights back at you, so the road seems to float. No trees, no buildings, no elevation. Just white ground and black sky and your own engine noise bouncing off nothing. I was 35 miles from the nearest exit. I want you to hold that number. 35 miles. No gas station, no overpass, no emergency pull-off with a call box. Just interstate and salt, and the occasional reflector post, standing in the dark like a thin man watching you pass. That's when I saw her, standing on the right shoulder. Maybe 8 years old, maybe a little younger. It's hard to judge age at 2 a.m. through a windshield doing 65. White dress, no shoes. Standing perfectly still, not waving, not jumping, not doing any of the things a child in distress does when a pair of headlights finally comes after God knows how long alone in the dark. Just standing. My foot came off the accelerator before my brain had formed a complete thought. 31 years of keeping my head down, of not stopping, of every lecture I'd ever given myself about the dangers of pulling over for strangers in the dead of night. And none of it mattered, because she was a child, and she was alone, and there are some instincts that live deeper than common sense. I pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel under the tires. Dust. I left my hazards running and watched her in the side mirror as I rolled to a stop maybe 40 feet ahead of where she stood. She didn't move toward the truck. Didn't react to the lights or the air brake hiss or any of it. I sat for a moment watching. Then the passenger door opened. I did not hear footsteps on the running board. I did not hear the grab handle rattle. I did not hear the 3-step climb that every person makes when they get into a cab that size. That distinct sequence, step, pull, step, settle, none of that. The door simply opened, and she was there. And then she was sitting in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap like she'd been there the whole trip. Her dress was clean. That's the detail that lodged itself in me first and never left. Out there on a salt flat at 2 a.m., 35 miles from anything, and her dress was clean. No dust, no road grime, no sweat. Clean the way something is clean when it hasn't touched the world yet. She didn't look at me. I asked her if she was okay. Nothing. I asked if she was hurt. Nothing. I asked where her parents were, where she'd come from, if there'd been an accident somewhere behind me on the road. She looked straight ahead through the windshield. Her feet didn't reach the floor. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave her there. I couldn't call anyone. No signal for another 20-something miles. So I did the only thing that made any sense. I pulled back onto the highway and drove. I figured I'd get to a signal, call the highway patrol, let them sort it out. She'd talk eventually. Shock does things to kids. I drove in silence for a long time. If you've never driven the salt flats at night, understand that there is no ambient light out there. No glow from a distant city bleeding over the horizon. No farm lights. Nothing. You are inside your headlights and everything else is absolute dark. And the silence between two people in a truck cab is a very specific kind of silence. It has weight. It has pressure. And that night, it was the heaviest silence I've ever sat inside. 22 miles. I know it was 22 because I was watching the odometer the way you watch a clock when you're waiting for something. Counting down to the first exit, to a cell signal, to a payphone, to anything. At mile 22, she spoke. She said, "Exit's coming up." Her voice was flat, not scared, not relieved, just informational, like a GPS prompt. And I looked up at the highway, and there was the sign, just entering the edge of my headlights. The exit sign. I hadn't told her where I was going. I hadn't said anything about an exit. There was no way to see that sign from where we'd been. It wasn't visible until you were right on top of it. I hadn't known myself that this was the exit I was going to take until I saw it. My hands tightened on the wheel. I took the exit, pulled into a truck stop. One of those small, half-empty ones with 2 fuel islands and a flickering overhead light and a cashier behind bulletproof glass, parked under the brightest light I could find. And I turned to ask her name. The seat was empty. I'm going to be careful here, yeah? Because I've told this story enough times to know where people stop believing it. And I understand why they stop. And I'm not asking anyone to believe anything. I'm just telling you what happened. The seat was empty. The door was closed. The door alarm, the sensor that sounds when a cab door opens while the engine is running, had not gone off. Not when I parked, not before I turned around. I would have heard it. I've heard it 10,000 times. You don't tune that sound out. I got out and walked around the truck, looked under it, looked in the sleeper, walked the perimeter of the parking lot. The cashier hadn't seen a child. The lot was empty except for 2 other rigs, parked with their curtains drawn. She was gone. I sat in that parking lot until sunrise. I didn't sleep. I watched the lot and drank bad coffee from a machine and tried to build an explanation out of whatever rational materials I had available. Stress, fatigue, 16 hours behind the wheel. There are things your mind does when you're tired that feel absolutely real. I knew that. I'd experienced highway hypnosis before. The micro hallucinations, the shadow deer at the tree line. But I had stopped the truck. I had physically stopped and moved to the shoulder and sat there. And the door had opened. When it was light enough, I drove back out to the salt flats, back to the mile marker where I'd stopped. I knew it because I'd noted it in my logbook out of habit, the way you log everything when you've been doing this long enough. The shoulder was soft at the edge where the salt crust breaks down into powder. And there they were, small barefoot prints, right where I'd seen her standing. I followed them back with my eyes. They went back about 200 yards, and then they stopped, not at a vehicle, not at a guardrail or a mile marker or any structure. They simply stopped, as if she had been placed there, as if she had arrived in that spot without walking to it. I called the highway patrol from the truck stop, told them everything. An officer came out, looked at the prints, took my statement. He was professional. He didn't tell me I was crazy. He asked the same questions I'd been asking myself all night and wrote down my answers without visible reaction. No child matching that description was reported missing in the region. Not that week, not the weeks around it. I checked for months after, called the county sheriff's office, checked newspaper archives, asked the highway patrol contact who'd taken my statement if anything had turned up. Nothing. The thing that stays with me, the thing that makes this different from a dream or a hallucination or a story I've assembled from fear and exhaustion, is the exit. She told me the exit was coming before it was visible. You can explain away the empty seat. You can explain away the clean dress. You can make a case for the door alarm malfunctioning, for the prints being old, for a dozen different things. I've made all those cases to myself, repeatedly, in the years since. But she knew the exit was coming, and I have never found a way to put that somewhere comfortable. There is no shelf in my mind where that detail sits without bothering me. It's still loose, still moving. I'll be doing something completely ordinary, cooking, reading, sitting on the porch, and it surfaces, the flatness of her voice, the way she said it like she was reading from something. Exit's coming up, and my hands do what they did on the wheel that night. They tighten. I retired 8 months after, told everyone it was my knees, which wasn't entirely a lie. But the real thing, the thing I've said to maybe 4 people in 12 years, is that I couldn't be on that road at night anymore without watching the shoulder, without slowing down at the salt flats, without some part of me waiting to see her standing there again, hands folded, dress clean, feet that hadn't touched the ground to get there. I don't know what she was. I don't know what she needed. I don't know if pulling over was the right thing or the worst thing I've ever done. What I know is this: something was out there in the dark, 35 miles from anywhere, and it needed a ride, and I gave it one. The fog came in off the water around 10. By 11, it had swallowed everything. 9 years solo. 9 years of overnight runs through mountain passes and desert highways and logging roads that don't appear on commercial GPS systems. 9 years of being the only woman at every fuel island, in every way station break room, at every 3 a.m. diner counter from Seattle to Spokane. I'd built a system, a careful, deliberate, invisible system, and it had kept me safe. Until the night I realized someone had been studying it longer than I'd been running it. It was early March, eastern Washington state, US 2 cutting through the corridor between the Cascades and the Idaho border. The kind of road that feels abandoned in summer and genuinely hostile in winter. 2 lanes, no shoulders worth mentioning. Pine forest pressing in both sides, so close that your mirrors clip the dark between the trees. Temperature sitting at 19 degrees. The kind of cold that makes the cab feel smaller, that makes the world outside the windshield feel further away than it actually is. I was carrying machine parts, legitimate load, legitimate contract, nothing unusual. I'd run this corridor maybe 60 times over 2 years. I knew its rhythms, where the cell signal dropped, which passes iced first, which mile markers meant I was 30 minutes from a fuel stop. I knew this road the way you know a thing you've survived repeatedly. I noticed the truck around mile 40. It was behind me, far enough back that I caught it only in the left mirror. A set of headlights sitting at a distance that wasn't quite tailgating, but wasn't quite comfortable either. Maybe 400 yards. Running steady, not gaining, not falling back, just present. I didn't think much of it. There are other drivers on the road. That's allowed. But at mile 53, I decided to stop for fuel at a station I didn't need to stop at. Tank was at 2/3. I could have made another 80 miles easy. I stopped because I wanted coffee, and because the bathroom at this particular station was single occupancy with a lock, which mattered on this stretch. I pulled in, got out, went inside. When I came back to the truck 7 minutes later, I scanned the highway the way I always did before getting back in. The headlights were parked on the far shoulder, maybe a quarter mile east, sitting still. No fuel station there, no turnout, just the shoulder, waiting. I pulled back onto US 2 and within 2 miles, the headlights were behind me again. Same distance, 400 yards, give or take. I told myself coincidence, told myself same direction, same speed means nothing. Told myself all the rational things. Then, at mile 71, I took an exit I had never taken before, a county road that added 11 miles to my route for no logical reason. I took it because something in my chest told me to, the same animal instinct that tells you to cross the street before you've consciously processed why. The headlights took the exit. I want to be precise about what happened next, because precision is the only thing I have to offer here, the only thing that separates this from paranoia. I turned onto a county road, then a secondary road, then doubled back via a gravel stretch that wasn't on any freight route, that no driver running this corridor would have any business using. I knew it only because I'd gotten lost on it once, 2 summers before, and remembered the way it looped back to the highway near a grain elevator. Every turn, the lights followed. No hesitation, no overshoot and correction. Every turn I made, they made, immediately, cleanly, as if they were watching my hands on the wheel rather than my taillights on the road. By the time I got back to the highway, my breathing had gone shallow, and my hands were doing something I'd never felt them do before in 9 years of solo driving. They were shaking, not from cold. From the specific biological response that happens when your body understands something your mind is still negotiating. I pushed east, opened it up to 75. The light stayed 400 yards back, exactly 400. As if the distance itself was intentional, close enough to maintain, far enough to avoid being actionable. I keyed my CB on channel 19, asked if anyone was on the road behind me eastbound US 2, static. Then a voice, male, unhurried, said, "Just us out here tonight." I did not respond. I turned the CB off. I want to tell you that I handled the next 40 miles with composure. I want to tell you I was methodical and calm. But the truth is, I drove those 40 miles in a tunnel of adrenaline where the only thing that existed was the next quarter mile of road, and those headlights in the mirror, and the calculation I was running on repeat. How far to the next fuel stop? How many people would be there? How much light? The Flying J outside of Spokane had 6 trucks in the lot, and every island lit up like noon. I pulled in fast, parked directly under a light cluster between 2 other rigs, and sat with my doors locked and watched the highway. The truck slowed as it passed the exit ramp. I saw it clearly for the first time. A dark blue cab, no company markings, no placards on the trailer, running lights slightly dimmer than regulation. It slowed to maybe 35 as it passed my exit. Then it continued east and disappeared. I sat there for 20 minutes before I could make my hands work well enough to call my dispatcher. He told me to file a report in the morning. Told me it was probably nothing. Told me the road does things to your perception at night. The following week, a highway patrol officer contacted my company directly. Not because of my report. I hadn't filed one yet. Because they were already building a file. He asked me to come in. Sat me across a desk in a Spokane field office and explained, in the careful language of someone who has learned to deliver unsettling information without causing panic, that they had been tracking a pattern on this corridor for 6 weeks. 7 female solo drivers, all reporting the same experience, a vehicle maintaining fixed distance, following through non-standard route deviations, disappearing before anything actionable occurred. Always the same corridor, always between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., always a truck with no identifying markings. I listened to all of this. I was steady through all of this. Then he opened a folder and slid a photograph across the desk. It was a color photograph, printed on standard paper, slightly grainy, taken with a long lens in low light. It showed a rest area I used regularly, about 40 miles into the US 2 corridor. My rig was in the frame, parked, lights off, curtains drawn, the way it looked when I was in my sleeper. The timestamp in the corner read 3 nights before this meeting, and there was a figure in the photograph, standing beside my driver's side door, close enough to touch the handle, looking directly at the camera, not at my truck, not at the road, but at the camera, as if they had known it was mounted in that tree line, as if they had spotted the surveillance equipment and chosen to perform for it rather than hide from it. The officer said the photograph had been taken by a trail camera they'd mounted after the second driver reported the pattern. He said they did not know how the individual had detected the camera's position. He said the figure had not appeared on any other frame, not approaching, not leaving, only in that single image, standing at my door, looking at the lens. He said, "We believe this person has been watching you specifically for some time. The level of route familiarity they're demonstrating is not consistent with casual observation." Route familiarity. I drove home that night and sat in my apartment and went back through everything. Every stop I'd made on that corridor for 2 years. Every fuel station, every rest area, every time I'd run the same sequence because it was efficient, because it was my system, because I had built something careful and reliable, and I'd believed that careful and reliable meant safe. What I understood, what settled into me over the following days with the slow, nauseating weight of something you can't unknow, is that my system had not protected me. My system had educated someone. Every repeated stop, every predictable sequence, every time I'd run the same route, the same way out of habit, I had been teaching, providing data, building a map of myself that someone else had been collecting and studying and using. The investigation produced no arrest. The blue cab was never identified. The figure in the photograph was never matched to any known individual. 2 of the other 6 drivers changed corridors. 1 left the industry entirely. I kept running US 2. I changed everything. My stops, my timing, my fuel patterns, my rest locations. I introduced randomness into every decision. I stopped running the same sequence twice in a row. But here's what I couldn't change, and what I still think about on long runs when the road goes quiet and the mirrors pull at my attention the way they do. Whoever was out there had known my route better than I did, had known my stops before I made them, had known which rest area I'd use on which night, had been standing at my door while I was 12 inches away on the other side of it, asleep and completely certain I was alone. The officer told me the figure looked directly at the surveillance camera. That's the part I can't find a place for. Not the following, not the photograph, not even the fact that they'd been at my door. The part that I come back to, the part that lives in the back of every night shift I've run since, is that they looked at the camera. They knew they were being watched. And they looked anyway, because they weren't afraid of being seen. They were showing me something, or showing someone, or maybe just confirming for their own satisfaction that they had gotten that close to me, to the investigation, to everything, and had remained completely and deliberately out of reach. I still run the corridor, but I don't sleep the same way anymore, and I check my mirrors differently now. Not for traffic, not for weather, not for the things a driver normally watches for. I check them the way you check a room before you turn off the light, just to make sure. The coffee was still hot when the town disappeared. 17 years on the Texas-New Mexico corridor, and I'd developed the particular kind of confidence that comes from repetition. The confidence that tells you there are no surprises left on a road you've run this many times. You know the dips, the dead zones, the exits that look open but aren't. You know where the deer cross, and where the wind hits sideways, and where the pavement changes texture under your tires at night. Like a different road trying to surface through the old one. That confidence is what made what happened so hard to process. Because the road I thought I knew completely showed me something that night that had no right to exist on it. It was August, the specific, punishing August of the New Mexico high desert, where the air stays hot even after midnight and the dark has a weight to it, a density, like the heat never left, it just changed form. I was southbound on US 285, running a standard freight load, timing my push to hit the dead stretch between Roswell and Artesia, about 110 miles of absolutely nothing. In the early hours when traffic was non-existent and the road belonged entirely to the rig and whatever else was out there moving through the dark. My GPS dropped signal at mile marker 147. It always dropped there. That particular stretch of 285 had a dead zone I'd been navigating by memory for so long that the GPS losing signal felt like a formality, like a colleague stepping out of a meeting you could finish without them. I drove by feel, by memory, by the stars when the clouds let them through. Around 1:15 a.m., the highway curved. That's the thing I keep returning to, the detail that doesn't fit no matter how I position it. The highway curved to the right in a way I didn't recognize. Not dramatically, not a new road, or a fork, or anything that should have triggered alarm. Just a gentle rightward arc that I didn't remember being there, that my 17 years of muscle memory didn't anticipate. And my hands adjusted before my brain could ask why. And when I came out of that curve, there was a town. I want to be careful here about the word town, because what I mean is a real one. Not a cluster of trailers, not a feed store and a gas pump. A town, lit storefronts, a main street running perpendicular to the highway, streetlights on poles, a water tower at the far end catching the moonlight, a motel on the left with a neon sign burning orange-red in the dark, vacancy, a diner on the right with its interior lights on, and a pickup truck parked at an angle out front the way trucks park in small towns, where the parking lot was designed by someone who'd never seen a parking lot. I slowed without deciding to slow. In 17 years, I had never seen this town. I had driven this stretch in daylight and at night, in summer and winter, hung over and rested and everything between. I knew this corridor the way I knew my own driveway. There was no town here, and yet I pulled into the diner's lot, sat for a moment with the engine running, looking at the building. The lights were on inside. I could see movement, a figure behind the counter, slow and unhurried, the way diner staff move at 1 a.m. when the rush is long gone and the next one is still hours away. I went in because I needed to understand what I was looking at, and because I'd been driving for 6 hours, and the coffee in my thermos had gone cold somewhere around Roswell, and there was a diner with its lights on. And sometimes the simplest explanation is the one you walk toward. The bell above the door worked. The air conditioning worked. Hit me in the face with that specific diner cold. The kind that smells like coffee and fryer oil and something underneath both of those things. That is just the smell of a place that has been serving people for a long time. A woman behind the counter. 50s, maybe 60s, gray hair pulled back. The kind of face that has been patient with strangers for so many years that patience has become its resting expression. She poured coffee before I sat down. Not asked if I wanted it. Poured it, set it in front of the stool at the end of the counter nearest the door, the way you do for someone you were expecting. I sat. I drank the coffee. It was good, not truck stop good, actually good. The kind of coffee that tastes like someone cares about what they're serving. A man was sitting 3 stools down. Late 60s, canvas jacket, boots with actual mud on them. He turned and looked at me the way men in small diners look at strangers. Not unfriendly, just assessing, the rural version of a handshake. He said cattle prices were going to break bad before October. Said it the way you continue a conversation rather than start one, as if we'd been talking before I walked in. I said I didn't know much about cattle. He nodded like that was a reasonable position to hold. I used the restroom. The restroom had a hand dryer that worked. Paper towels, soap in a dispenser that was recently filled. I'm telling you this because these are the details that lodged in me afterward, the specifics that made it impossible to write off as a dream or a hallucination. The hand dryer, the soap, the cattle prices, the temperature of the coffee. I paid at the counter, $4.75. I put a 5 on the counter and told her to keep it. She said thank you in the voice of someone who has said thank you to 10,000 strangers and meant it every time. I walked back to the rig, pulled out of the lot, got back on the highway, and here is where the night turns in a direction I still don't have language for. My GPS reconnected at 1:34 a.m. It placed me 11 miles north of where I'd been when it dropped signal. 11 miles north, not south. I had been driving south. I had driven south through the dead zone, turned right on the curve, pulled into the diner lot, spent maybe 20 minutes inside, pulled out heading south again. I was 11 miles north of my starting point. I pulled over, sat on the shoulder with the hazards going, and looked at the GPS screen for a long time. It wasn't glitching. The signal was clean. The position was locked. The map was rendering correctly. It was showing me exactly where I was. It was showing me somewhere I shouldn't have been able to get to from where I'd started. I made the delivery. I always make the delivery. You learn early that the load doesn't care about your psychological state. But I couldn't let it go. That's the thing about a mind that has spent 17 years solving road problems. It doesn't stop working a problem just because the road is over. 3 weeks later, I called a contact at the New Mexico State Highway Department. A man I'd spoken to twice before about road conditions, legitimate business. No reason for him to think I was anything other than a professional with a question. I gave him the location, US 285, the stretch between mile markers 147 and 165, and described the town, the diner, the motel. Asked if there'd been some kind of development out there I'd missed, a new service stop, anything. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that stretch of 285 was federally designated empty corridor. No incorporated municipalities, no commercial development, no structures of any permitted kind. Had been that way for decades. Any development in that zone would have required state and federal approval that would have taken years and generated public record. I gave him the diner's name, the name I'd read on the sign above the door when I walked in. He put me on hold for 4 minutes. When he came back, his voice had changed in a way that was subtle but not subtle enough. He said there was no registered business by that name in the county, in the state database, in any commercial licensing record he could access. I thanked him and hung up. I went to my truck and opened the glove box where I keep receipts. Old habit, 17 years of paper records, because I've never fully trusted digital systems for things that matter. The receipt was there. $4.75. Handwritten on a paper slip, the old kind, with the carbon copy backing. No business name printed at the top. Just a handwritten figure and a handwritten total. The ink was slightly smeared on the 4, the way ink smears when it's written quickly or when the paper is slightly damp. I have it still. I've shown it to 3 people. All 3 said the same thing. It's a receipt. It proves you bought something somewhere. Somewhere. I drove the 285 corridor 4 more times that year. Daylight runs twice. Night runs twice. I watched for the curve. I watched mile marker 147 with the specific attention of a man who knows what he saw and needs to see it again to understand what it means. The highway doesn't curve there. It runs straight and flat and uninterrupted, the way it always did, the way the satellite maps show it, the way 17 years of memory told me it should be, before that August night decided otherwise. I've looked at the aerial maps, pulled them up on 3 different mapping services, zoomed in until the resolution broke down into pixels, and I couldn't get any closer. Empty scrubland, brush and rock and the road cutting through it like a scar. No town, no water tower, no motel sign, no diner. Just the desert, sitting there in satellite imagery, looking exactly the way it's supposed to look. The way it looked to every camera and every data system and every instrument designed to record what is actually there. Except one night in August, it looked different to me. It looked occupied. It looked like a place that had been there long enough to wear itself in. Long enough for a woman to learn how to pour coffee for strangers before they asked. Long enough for a man to have opinions about cattle prices in October. Long enough to feel in every physical and sensory detail available to me, completely and undeniably real. The receipt is in my glove box. The town is not on any map. And somewhere between those 2 facts is something I have stopped trying to explain and started trying to simply carry. The way you carry anything on a long run, that doesn't have a clean answer. You keep driving, you watch the road, and sometimes when the GPS drops signal and the highway does something your hands don't recognize, you keep your eyes forward and you don't take the curve. You don't stop for the lights. You don't go in. The recording still exists. I've listened to it once. I will not listen to it again. 22 years behind the wheel teaches you the difference between tired and dangerous. Tired is mile 8, mile 10, heavy eyes, slow blinks, the kind of fatigue that coffee fixes and a good stretch at a rest stop resets. Dangerous is something else entirely. Dangerous is mile 16, going on 17. When your body has been running on cortisol and stubbornness for so long that the brain starts doing things without asking permission, starts filling in gaps. Starts making the world make sense in ways the world isn't actually making sense. I knew the difference. I had always known the difference. That's what made what happened on I-75 that July night so hard to dismiss, because I was monitoring myself. Actively, deliberately monitoring myself the way you monitor a gauge that's been running hot. Checking in every 30 minutes, cataloging what I was seeing against what I knew should be there. I was in control. Right up until the moment something else was. It was a Georgia summer, which means the heat doesn't leave when the sun does. It just changes address, moves from the sky into the asphalt, and radiates back up at you in waves that make the road surface shimmer even at midnight. I was southbound on I-75, somewhere in the long agricultural stretch past Valdosta, pushing through hour 16 of what was supposed to be a 19-hour run. The load was time-sensitive. The bonus for on-time delivery was real money. I had made this calculation before, and it had always worked out. I knew the hallucinations would come. They always did past hour 14. Shadow shapes at the tree line that resolved into nothing when the headlights hit them directly. Mile markers that seemed to lean slightly before snapping back upright. The lane lines doing that slow breathing thing where the white dashes pulse in and out like something alive beneath the paint. I had a system for it. Name what you see, check it against reality, discard it. Shadow deer, named, checked, discarded. Breathing lane, named, checked, compensated for. Leaning sign, named, checked, kept driving. The system had worked for years. Around 3:30 a.m., somewhere in that dead corridor, where the interstate runs through nothing but pine forest and darkness and the occasional overpass that appears out of the black like a concrete dream, the passenger seat started talking. Not sounds, not murmuring, not the kind of indistinct noise a tired brain generates to fill silence. Sentences. A male voice, calm and unhurried. speaking in complete grammatical sentences from the passenger seat of a cab I had visually confirmed was empty minutes earlier at a fuel stop where I'd walked around the entire rig with a flashlight because that's what you do at hour 15 when you're being careful. I almost ran off the road. My hands corrected before my mind caught up. 22 years of muscle memory keeping the rig between the lines while the rest of me tried to process what I was hearing. The voice said, "Green overpass, quarter mile." I looked up. Green overpass, exactly where it said. Coming into my headlights now, the way it would have been invisible from 30 seconds ago. My mouth went dry in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. The voice said, "Dead armadillo, right shoulder, 50 feet." I watched the right shoulder, 50 feet ahead of where my headlights were when the voice spoke. A dead armadillo, right shoulder, curled the way they curl, shell catching a fragment of light. I want to tell you that I pulled over immediately. I want to tell you that the rational response kicked in cleanly, and I got off the road and called someone. But the truth is, I drove for another 4 minutes in a state that I can only describe as a total suspension of cognitive function. Not panic, not calm, just a complete inability to decide anything while the voice continued quietly, describing the road ahead of me in the same flat informational tone, the way a navigator reads from a map, the way someone reads from something they can see that you cannot. A detour sign, orange, left lane closed 2 miles ahead, described before my headlights could have picked it up. A mile marker number, stated precisely 3 seconds before I passed it. A hawk sitting on a guardrail, described as dead, and when I passed it, the hawk was dead, positioned the way something is positioned when it landed there already gone. I pulled over. I pulled over hard, gravel shoulder, hazards on, and turned to the passenger seat in the specific way you turn when you need to end something, when you need to look directly at the source of the thing that is dismantling you and force it to be real or be nothing. The seat was empty. The cab was empty. The sleeper curtain was open, and the bunk was undisturbed, and the only sounds were the engine idling, and the hazard lights clicking, and my own breathing, which was not as steady as I needed it to be. I sat there for a long time. Then I picked up my CB handset. Not to call anyone specifically, I don't think I had a coherent plan. I think my hands needed something to do, while my brain caught up to the situation. I keyed the mic and said something. I don't remember exactly what. Something about my position, something routine, the kind of traffic check you make out of habit. My dispatcher called me 12 minutes later. He said, "You doing all right out there? You've been transmitting for a while." I asked him what he meant. He said my CB had been live, open mic, broadcasting for 11 minutes. He said the night dispatcher at the terminal had been listening because an open mic on a solo driver at 3 a.m. is the kind of thing you monitor. He said they'd heard me talking. I told him I hadn't been talking. I told him I hadn't said a word since my last check-in 40 minutes prior. There was a pause that lasted long enough to mean something. He said, "It wasn't your voice. Here is what the recording contains. I know this because the terminal kept 48 hours of CB transmission logs as standard practice, and I requested mine the following morning and sat in the terminal parking lot with a supervisor and listened to 11 minutes and 40 seconds of audio from my rig between 3:31 and 3:42 a.m. My voice is not on it. What is on it is a male voice, calm, unhurried, speaking in complete sentences, describing the road, the overpass, the armadillo, the detour sign, the mile markers, the hawk, describing them in sequence, ahead of when they would have been visible, in the same flat navigational tone I had heard from the passenger seat. The supervisor listened to the whole thing without speaking. When it finished, he sat quietly for a moment and then asked me, carefully, whether I had had anyone in the cab with me. I told him no. He asked if I had a phone, a tablet, any device that could have broadcast through the CB system. I told him no. He asked if I had been using any medications, any supplements, anything that could account for. I told him to stop, because here is the thing that the recording does not explain, and that no one in that parking lot that morning was willing to look at directly. The voice described things before they were visible, before my headlights could have illuminated them, before any person in that cab, looking through that windshield, could have known they were there. The overpass was described when it was still dark ahead. The armadillo was described when the shoulder was still black. The hawk was described as dead before my lights touched the guardrail. Whatever was speaking, wherever the voice was coming from, it was not reading the road from inside my cab. It was reading the road from somewhere ahead of me, somewhere my headlights hadn't reached yet, somewhere that, by any physical understanding of how a vehicle moves through space, did not exist yet from my position. I have thought about this for a long time. I have thought about sleep deprivation and auditory hallucination and equipment malfunction and CB interference and every other framework available to a rational person trying to keep their relationship with reality intact. Here is where every framework breaks down: the recording. A hallucination is internal. A hallucination does not transmit on open mic. A hallucination does not get logged in a terminal's 48-hour audio archive. A hallucination does not get listened to by a night dispatcher who calls your driver at 3 a.m. because something sounds wrong. The voice was real enough to be recorded. The voice described things that were real. The voice knew what was ahead of me before I did. I finished the run. I always finish the run. The load doesn't care. The delivery window doesn't care. And somewhere between Valdosta and the Florida state line, I made the decision to put 1 mile in front of the other until there were no more miles left, and then deal with what I knew. I delivered on time. I got my bonus. I took 3 days off and slept in a room with the curtains closed and the television on and every light burning, and I did not drive. And I did not think about the recording. And I did not think about the passenger seat. And I did not think about the hawk sitting dead on the guardrail exactly where the voice said it would be. On the 4th day, I went back to work. Because that's the only rational response available to a person who has encountered something irrational and survived it. You go back to work, you run the route, you keep the load moving. But I run with the interior light on now, all night, the whole run, and I keep the CB off. Not because I'm afraid of what I might hear coming out of it. Because I'm afraid of what might come out of it that isn't me and get recorded and be real. The first one you can explain away. A man in a long coat standing at a dirt road junction at 2 a.m. in the Nevada desert. Sure, broken down, waiting for someone. Wrong place, wrong time. There are 100 reasons a person stands on the side of a highway in the dark, and a driver with 24 years under his belt has seen most of them. You catalog it, you file it, you keep moving. That's exactly what he did. He was 61 years old, running the Montana to California corridor, a route he'd driven so many times he could close his eyes on certain stretches and still tell you exactly where he was by the sound the road made under his tires. US 93 northbound, rural Nevada bleeding into southern Idaho, high desert, October, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, it just arrives, settling into the cab joints and the door seals and the back of your neck before you realize the temperature dropped. It was the first night of a 3-night run. He saw the figure around 1:40 a.m., maybe 30 miles north of Wells. A dirt road split off from the highway to the east, one of those unmarked county roads that goes somewhere nobody has mapped yet, or goes nowhere at all. The man was standing exactly at the junction, not on the road, not beside the road. At the junction centered between the two paths, like he was the point where they met. Long tan coat, both hands at his sides, not waving, not flagging, just standing, face turned toward the highway, watching the rig pass. The driver noted it. That is all. You note things when you drive alone at night for a living. You build a catalog of the strange because the strange is everywhere once you are out past where the towns stop. He did not think about the man in the tan coat again until the second night. 218 miles north, different state, southern Idaho, a corridor he knew, as well as his own driveway. A stretch of highway that runs flat and dark between low scrubland and distant ridge lines that you can only see during the day. He came around a long, shallow bend at 11:50 p.m. and his headlights caught them. 2 people, standing at another dirt road junction. Identical tan coats, same posture, hands at their sides, faces turned toward the road, still as fence posts, no vehicle visible, no light source. Just two figures at a junction in the dark, watching him pass at 65 miles an hour. He felt something move through him that was not quite fear yet. It was the thing that comes before fear. The recognition that your brain is trying to build an explanation, and the materials are not adding up. 200 miles is not a coincidence you can file away. He picked up his CB, tried channel 19, got nothing but static and a distant conversation between two drivers somewhere south of him, talking about a way station backup outside Twin Falls. He switched it off, kept driving, watched his mirrors for 10 miles until the darkness behind him was just darkness again. He told himself different people, similar coats. The mind connects things on long night drives because the mind needs something to do. That is the whole trick of this job, learning which thoughts to trust and which ones your exhaustion invented for you. He almost believed it. The third night is the one he does not talk about at home. He was running the same corridor northbound, deeper into Idaho now, a stretch of US 93 that cuts through high rangeland, where the only landmarks are the occasional gate post and the distant glow of a ranch light so far off the highway it looks like a star that fell sideways. He had been driving since 9 p.m. It was now 2:15 a.m., and the temperature outside had dropped to somewhere in the low 30s, and he had his heat running, and a coffee going cold in the cup holder, and the radio playing something low that he was not really listening to. Then his headlights found them. You have to understand what it looked like. Not one, not two, 5 figures spread across a half-mile stretch of highway shoulder, each one spaced at an exact interval from the next, consistent enough that it felt measured, deliberate, like someone had taken a tape and marked out positions. All 5 in tan coats, all 5 facing the road, none of them moving. He did not slow down. His foot went to the accelerator instead of the brake, which he had never done before on this road. And he came through that half-mile stretch doing just over 80. His headlights swept each figure as he passed. 1, then 20 seconds, 2, then 20 seconds, 3, all the way through. And not one of them flinched, not one turned ahead. Not one reacted to 40 tons of freight moving past them at highway speed, close enough that the wind off the trailer would have hit them like a wall. They just stood there and let him pass. He was shaking by the time he reached the next truck stop, 14 miles north. He pulled in, killed the engine, and sat with his hands on the wheel for a while, doing the kind of breathing you do not have a name for, the kind that is less about air and more about reminding yourself you are still inside your own body. Then he called it in. Nevada Highway Patrol Dispatch. He explained what he had seen. The first night, the second night, now this. He gave locations as precisely as he could remember them. He described the coats, the posture, the spacing. The dispatcher listened without interrupting. That was the first thing that struck him as wrong. Dispatchers interrupt. They ask clarifying questions. They redirect. They manage the call. This one just listened all the way through. And when he finished, there was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to make him wonder if the call had dropped. Then the dispatcher said they had received 4 other calls that week. Same corridor, different drivers, different nights, all describing the same individuals. He asked what they were doing about it. The dispatcher said no law was being broken. There was nothing to act on. He asked if they knew who these people were. Another pause. The kind of pause that is not a person thinking. It is a person deciding. We are aware of the reports, the dispatcher said. That was all. He told me later it was not the 5 figures that stayed with him. It was not the perfect spacing, or the identical coats, or the way none of them reacted to his rig moving past its speed. Those things were strange, and strange things happen on long-haul routes, and you learn to carry strange things the way you carry any other cargo, sealed. In the back. Not your problem until it becomes your problem. What stayed with him was the dispatcher's voice. In 24 years of calling in road hazards, accidents, debris, suspicious vehicles, he had talked to a lot of dispatchers. He knew the voice of someone encountering new information, the small adjustments in tone, the slight uptick in attention, the barely perceptible shift in how they hold the call. This dispatcher had none of that. This dispatcher sounded like someone reading from a script they had read before. We are aware of the reports, not we will look into it. Not thank you for calling. Not can you give me more detail. Aware. Already aware. Had been aware. As if the calls had been coming in long enough that they had written a response for them and trained someone to deliver it without inflection. He changed his corridor after that run. Rerouted himself through a longer eastward path that added 90 minutes to each leg and cost him money he did not have to lose. His dispatcher pushed back. He told her it was a mechanical preference. Road surface, weight limits. He invented reasons. He never ran US 93 again. Near the end of our conversation, I asked him what he thought they were. The people in the coats. He was quiet for a moment. Outside it was afternoon. Ordinary birds somewhere. I think they were people, he said. I am not trying to make it something it is not. They were people. He looked at his coffee. But organized people who knew that corridor well enough to place themselves at specific points along it, on specific nights, in specific numbers, who had enough coordination to wear the same coats and hold the same posture and not break it when an 80,000-pound rig blew past them at speed. He stopped. That does not scare you less, he said. It scares you different. He is right. A ghost is frightening because it cannot be explained. A person with a plan is frightening because it can. Because behind every coordinated, patient, invisible thing, there is a reason. There is a purpose. There is something they were waiting for. Out there in the dark, at the junction of roads that go nowhere. And of all the drivers who passed through that corridor that week, he was one of 5 who called it in. Which means the others did not. Which means somewhere out there, 4 other drivers saw the same thing, pulled back onto the highway, and never told anyone. And whatever those figures were waiting for at those junctions in the dark, standing perfectly still in their identical coats on 3 consecutive nights across 2 states, watching every rig that passed with the patience of something that had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do but wait. No one ever found out if they found it. He did not open the trailer door. That is the part he comes back to. Not what was inside. Not the sounds. Not the 3 men at the receiving facility who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this exact thing many times before. What he comes back to, years later, is the 4 minutes he stood outside that trailer in a South Dakota blizzard at minus 18 degrees with his hand on the latch and made the choice not to look. He is 47 years old. Refrigerated freight. Midwest regional routes. A man who has hauled everything legal freight can contain, and a few things he suspected sat in gray areas, but never asked about, because asking costs you work and work is what keeps the lights on. He is not a nervous man. He is not imaginative in ways that get people into trouble. He is practical in the way that long years of solitary driving make you practical, which is to say he trusts what he can see and measure and set against prior experience. What happened on I-90 westbound through the South Dakota Badlands in February did not fit against any prior experience he had. The contract came in late. That was the first irregularity, though not the kind that raises flags on its own. Last-minute sealed freight jobs exist. Refrigerated trailer, overnight haul, delivery to a private facility address in Wyoming by 6 a.m. The rate was higher than standard. Not extravagantly higher, not the kind of number that makes you ask questions out loud, but high enough that he noticed. High enough that when the dispatcher said no questions about the load, he filed that detail somewhere quiet and said fine. He picked up the trailer at a transfer yard outside Sioux Falls at 8 p.m. The seal was already on. The paperwork listed the shipper as a logistics company he did not recognize. The contents category marked as biological research material. Temperature maintained. Handle with care. That category covers a lot of things. Vaccines, tissue samples, agricultural specimens. He had hauled biological research material before, and it looked exactly like this on paper and felt exactly like this at pickup, which is to say, normal, sealed, quiet. He pulled out of the yard at 8:40 p.m. into a sky that was already doing what South Dakota skies do in February, which is threatening something serious. By the time he hit I-90 westbound, the snow had started. By Mitchell, it was coming sideways. By the time he was deep into the Badlands stretch, it was a full whiteout. The kind that shrinks your world down to the cone of your headlights and the white static beyond it. And nothing else. Wind chill -18. The road surface was packed snow over ice, and he had dropped to 40 miles an hour, and the world outside his cab had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Mile 340. He heard it. Not the sound of cargo shifting. He knows that sound. Freight moves. It settles against its restraints on curves. It redistributes weight on grades. It makes the low structural sounds of mass adjusting to physics. He has spent years cataloging those sounds the way a doctor learns to read an X-ray, automatically, without thinking. Pattern recognition built from repetition, until the normal sounds become invisible and only the wrong ones surface. This was wrong. It was slow. That was the first thing. Cargo shifts fast because physics is fast. This was deliberate in its pace. A movement that traveled from one end of the trailer to the other over the course of maybe 8 seconds, and then back, and then stopped, like something finding its position, like something that had been still for a long time deciding to adjust. Then the second sound. He does not have a clean word for it. Weight relocating, he says, but not the way freight relocates. The way something living shifts its mass from one point of contact to another. He had driven livestock before, years ago, early in his career, and there is a specific quality to the sound of an animal moving in an enclosed metal space, a biological rhythm to it, a sense of intention behind the movement that inanimate cargo does not have. This had that quality. He pulled over. I-90 westbound, mile 340, South Dakota Badlands, February, whiteout conditions, -18 wind chill. He put the rig in park on the shoulder and sat for a moment and listened. The trailer was quiet now. Just the wind against the metal, just the engine idling, just the snow hitting the windshield in a sound like static. He got out. If you have never been outside in a plains blizzard at that temperature, the closest I can get you is this. The cold is not a sensation. It is an interruption. It stops your body's conversation with itself. He crossed to the trailer in the dark with the wind trying to push him off his feet, and he put his hand on the latch and he stood there. 4 minutes. He timed it later, trying to reconstruct the night. 4 minutes he stood at that door with his hand on the latch in a blizzard at -18 degrees. And the trailer was silent, and he made his decision. He got back in the cab, and he drove. The facility was outside a small Wyoming town, down a county road that his GPS found, but that had no signage from the highway turnoff, no name on the gate. A low building, industrial, the kind of architecture that says function and nothing else. Floodlights, a loading dock, and 3 men standing outside in the cold, as if they had been expecting him at exactly this time, which they had, because the contract had a delivery window, and he was inside it. They did not speak much. They directed him to back to the dock, which he did, and then they asked him to step inside a small anteroom while they unloaded, which he did, because the contract had language about load security that he had read and signed, and this was within its terms. He waited maybe 25 minutes. He drank bad coffee from a machine. He did not hear anything from the loading dock. When they came back, one of them handed him a cash envelope. The amount was correct. Another one held out his hand for the contract paperwork, which the driver gave him because it said in the contract that documentation would be retained by the receiving party. He watched the man fold it and put it in a jacket pocket. Then they told him to drive. Not thank you, not have a good night, drive. The way you say it when the interaction is over and there is no social dimension to it. When the transaction is complete, and the other person's continued presence is a logistical inconvenience. He drove. Here is what he had left when he pulled back onto the highway. A cash envelope, a fuel receipt for 67 and 40 from a stop outside Rapid City, and the memory of a sound at mile 340. No contract, no shipper name he could verify. No record of the facility address in any business registry he checked later. The logistics company listed on the paperwork had a name that returned nothing in any search he ran. Not a dissolved company, not a rebranded entity, not a shell registered anywhere. Nothing. He had been somewhere and done something, and there was no paper trail that said he had. That bothered him more than the sound. He is not a man who goes looking for explanations that involve things he cannot verify. And he does not use the word that some people reach for when they talk about this corridor and that region and facilities with no names. He does not need the story to be extraordinary. What bothers him, specifically and practically, is the system of it, the way every piece was designed to leave him with nothing. The sealed contract, the cash, the paperwork retrieval, the facility with no signage, the 3 men who spoke just enough to manage the transaction and not one word more. Somebody built that system. Somebody thought through every point where a record might form and removed it. Somebody decided that the driver who hauled this load needed to arrive at the other end of it, with no documentation and no recourse, and no story that anyone would be required to respond to. That is not an accident. That is architecture. He filed nothing because he had nothing to file. You cannot report a job you have no record of taking. You cannot describe a facility you cannot locate. You cannot explain a sound to an authority that will ask you what exactly you heard and require you to characterize it in language that will hold up against scrutiny. And the honest answer, the only honest answer he has, is that he heard something in a sealed refrigerated trailer on a South Dakota highway in a blizzard that moved the way living things move. And he chose not to open the door. He has thought about that choice many times since. In the clean light of ordinary days, with the practical mind he trusts, he runs it both directions. If he had opened the door and found standard biological freight that had shifted against its restraints, he would have resecured it, noted the anomaly, and driven on. The night would have been nothing. But he did not open the door. And the reason he did not open the door, the reason he stood in a blizzard for 4 minutes and then got back in his cab and drove 200 miles to a facility with no name, is not something he can explain in the clean light of ordinary days. It is not practical. It does not fit against prior experience. He did not open the door because some part of him, the part that had been driving alone at night long enough to develop instincts he does not have words for, understood one thing clearly in that moment. Whatever was on the other side of it did not want him to, and he was not ready to find out what happened when you gave something like that exactly what it wanted. He still hauls refrigerated freight, different routes now. He takes standard contracts, documented loads, shippers he can look up. He has turned down 3 last-minute sealed jobs since that February, all of them with rates just high enough to notice, but not high enough to ask about. He does not explain why to his dispatcher. She has not asked. He turned the radio off at the power switch. She was still talking. That is the detail he cannot get past, even now, years removed from that September night on I-20 westbound through rural Mississippi. Not the fact that she knew his name. Not the fact that she was on all 40 channels simultaneously, which is a thing that is not possible, which requires either a transmitter array that does not exist in civilian infrastructure, or an explanation he has never been able to locate in any technical manual he has consulted since. Not even the things she knew about his life, specific and private things that he had never transmitted on any frequency to anyone. What he cannot get past is the radio he turned off at the power switch, continuing to carry her voice into a silent cab at 2 a.m. in the Mississippi dark. He is 33 years old at the time of this. Southeast regional routes, 2 years of solo driving. A man who took to the road after a period in his life he does not detail except to say it was a period that required distance and motion, and the specific therapy of having somewhere to be that was not where you were. He is not superstitious. He grew up practical, in a family that treated the unexplained as a category of the not yet explained, and he carried that framework into adulthood and onto the road with him because it is a useful framework for a man who drives alone at night and needs his mind to stay level. That framework did not survive the night of September, I-20, mile marker somewhere past Meridian heading west. It started the way things start when you do not yet know they have started. Channel 19, the trucker channel. He had it running low as background, the way you do on long stretches, not really listening, just keeping the line open in case something relevant came through. Sometime around 12:30 a.m., a woman's voice came on, soft and unhurried, asking if anyone was out there. He responded. That is the thing he replays. He responded, because that is what you do, because Channel 19 is a shared space. And a voice asking if anyone is out there is an ordinary enough thing to hear and respond to. He gave his road handle, the two-word identifier he used on CB that had nothing to do with his legal name, nothing traceable to anything personal, just a road name he had used for 2 years on this corridor. She asked his name. He said his handle again. She said his name, his legal name, first name, the name on his birth certificate, on his commercial license, on the lease agreement for the apartment he had left behind 18 months earlier, a name he had never spoken on CB radio in his life. He switched to Channel 9. Her voice was already there, not joining the channel, already there. Mid-sentence, the same soft, unhurried cadence, as if she had been waiting on Channel 9 for him specifically. He went to 16, then 23. Then he scanned methodically, the way you scan when you are trying to locate a signal source, running through the full 40-channel range. And she was on every one of them. Not sequentially, simultaneously. The same voice, the same sentence, running across the full spectrum of available CB frequencies. At the same moment, that is when his hands went cold. He kept driving because stopping felt worse than moving. The Mississippi dark outside his windows was the particular dark of rural highway in the deep south. No ambient light, no distant glow of towns, just the tunnel of his headlights and the flat black beyond it. And her voice coming through the speaker at a volume he had not turned up. She began to talk about him, not at him, about him, in the third person at first, then shifting the way a story shifts when the narrator decides you are ready to hear it directly. She named his hometown, not the city he had listed on his current address, the actual town he had grown up in. A small place that he had not mentioned to anyone on this route, that existed nowhere in his trucking paperwork, that was connected to him only through records he had not accessed in years. He switched the CB off. Not the volume, the power switch. The unit went dark, the indicator light extinguished. Her voice continued, quieter maybe, or the same volume. He is not certain because by this point his ability to calibrate normal had stopped functioning. But she continued, from a unit with no power, in a cab doing 65 miles an hour through rural Mississippi. And she was talking about his mother. Specifically, she was talking about his mother's illness. The kind, the timeline, the particular way it had been progressing over the past year. Information he had shared with exactly 2 people in his life, and neither of them was a voice on a CB radio in Mississippi at 1 a.m. Pull over. That is what a rational person does. Pull over, get out, walk around the rig, reintroduce yourself to the physical world, reset. He knows this. He did not do it. He did not pull over because the thing his body understood, that his mind was still negotiating, was that pulling over meant stopping. And stopping meant the dark outside would stop moving past him and become the dark around him. And whatever was speaking to him from a powered-down radio in the middle of nowhere was not something he wanted to be stationary near. So he drove. For 40 minutes he drove without responding, without touching the CB, without doing anything except keeping the rig on the road and watching the mile markers pass and listening to a voice describe his life back to him from a unit that had no power to carry it. She described the reason he had started driving. He had told no one this, not his dispatcher, not the 2 friends he kept in irregular contact with, not the woman he had briefly been involved with before he left. The specific sequence of events, the specific morning, the specific thing that had made him understand that motion was the only available medicine. She described it with the accuracy of someone who had been present for it. He did not respond. Then she said quietly, into the silence he had maintained for 40 minutes, with the same unhurried softness she had used from the beginning. I know where you are stopping tonight. Not I know where you will stop. Present tense, no. As if his stopping point was already fixed, already determined. Already a fact she had access to the way you have access to something you witnessed, rather than something you predicted. He did not stop. This requires some explanation, because he had been driving for 6 hours and had a scheduled rest stop built into his route, and his body knew where it was. And under normal circumstances, he would have taken it. Instead, he drove past it, had watched the exit approach in his headlights, and he kept his foot level and he drove past it the way you drive past something you have decided not to engage with. And he did not look at the CB unit as he passed, and the voice did not comment on his choice. It did not say anything after that. The radio stayed silent for the remaining 190 miles to his terminal. Somewhere around mile 80, he reached over and turned the CB back on at the power switch. The indicator light came on. Channel 19 carried the normal low static of an empty frequency. No voice, no signal. Just the ordinary sound of an open channel in the middle of the night with nothing on it. He sat in his terminal parking lot until sunrise. He did not sleep. He sat with the engine off and the parking lot lights coming through the windshield, and he waited for the sky to change color because daylight felt like a condition that would prevent whatever had happened from continuing to happen, which is not a rational thing to believe, but rationality had vacated the premises somewhere around mile marker 180 and had not returned. In the morning, he called his dispatcher and requested a route change. She asked why. He said the road surface on that corridor was giving him concerns about his suspension. She said she would look into alternates. He said he would appreciate that. He never told her what actually happened. He told me because I asked the right way. Not what did you see, not what do you think it was, but what stayed with you. What is the thing you still go back to? He said. The silence after she spoke, not the voice, not the impossible transmission from a powered-down unit. The silence after. Because in that silence, he became aware of something he has not been able to fully articulate since, which is the sensation of being known, completely and specifically known, not observed from a distance, the way surveillance feels, which he would recognize from the part of his life he does not detail. Something closer than that, something that had access to the inside of his history and his grief, and the private architecture of why he became a man who drives alone at night, and had looked at all of it, and had said his name out loud, on 40 frequencies simultaneously, just to make sure he understood. It was not a threat. That is the part that does not resolve. It never threatened him. It did not describe harm. It did not follow him past that night, as far as he knows. It simply found him on a specific stretch of highway in the Mississippi dark, spoke to him from a radio he had turned off, told him things about himself that it should not have known, told him it knew where he was stopping, and then went quiet when he chose not to stop, as if it had wanted something from him that he had declined to give, as if whatever it was, it could wait. He drives different routes now, stays off I-20 through that stretch, keeps his CB on channel 19 out of professional habit, but with the volume lower than he used to, low enough that he would have to be listening specifically to hear a voice, if one came through. He is not sure whether that is caution or denial. He suspects it is both. Some nights, deep into a long run when the road has gone quiet and the hours have stacked up, and his mind is doing that thing it does at 3 a.m., where the borders between things get soft. He thinks about what she said. I know where you are stopping tonight. And he wonders, not for the first time and not for the last, whether she was right, whether somewhere on that corridor there is an exit he was always going to take, and whether the only reason he has not taken it yet is that he keeps driving past it in the dark. The car was cold. That is the first thing he noticed when he reached it, and he is a man who notices first things with precision, because he spent 11 years as a first responder before he ever sat behind the wheel of a rig. And first responders are trained to read a scene in the initial seconds, because the initial seconds tell you what the next hour is going to cost you. He had scrambled down that embankment on pure instinct, emergency kit in hand. 30 years of muscle memory, overriding the part of his brain that was still processing what his headlights had just shown him. And when he reached the crumpled silver sedan at the bottom of the ravine and put his hand on the hood, what he felt was not heat, not the fading warmth of a recently killed engine. Cold metal, ambient temperature cold. The kind of cold a vehicle reaches when it has been sitting in 40-degree night air for a very long time. He is 58 years old. Appalachian routes, West Virginia and Kentucky, a man built from the specific material of mountain roads and the patience they require. He does not speak dramatically. He does not reach for language that makes things larger than they are. When he tells this story, he tells it the way a former first responder tells any story about a scene, which is sequentially and with attention to the physical details that mattered. Because the physical details are what actually happened, and everything else is interpretation. What actually happened on US 119 in Pike County, Kentucky, on a November night at 9:45 p.m. is something the physical details cannot explain. He had been running this stretch for years, knew every bend. US 119 through the Kentucky mountains is the kind of road that requires a specific relationship between driver and geography, a continuous negotiation between the rig's momentum and the road's intentions. And he had developed that relationship over hundreds of runs until the road was less a route than a conversation he knew by heart. He knew this particular bend. Sharp left, tight guardrail on the valley side. The drop steep enough that he always came through it 10 miles under the speed limit, regardless of conditions. It was a clear night. No precipitation, no fog, visibility good. He came through the bend at 9:45 p.m. at approximately 35 miles an hour, and his headlights caught it in real time. A silver sedan, passenger side, sliding across the wet road surface toward the guardrail. He saw the overcorrection, the rear end swinging out, the headlights of the car sweeping the tree line as the driver lost the physics of it. He saw the guardrail give at the second post. He saw the car go over. He had the rig stopped and the emergency brake set in seconds. Grabbed his kit from behind the seat. The same kit he had carried since his first responder years. Never removed it from the cab in 20 years of driving. Because you do not remove the thing that has already proven itself necessary. He went down the embankment in the dark with a flashlight and the particular focused calm that training installs in a person so deeply that it functions even when everything else is failing. The car was there, crumpled against a tree line at the base of the slope, driver's side impact, the kind of deformation that tells you something specific about the speed and angle of contact. His flashlight swept the vehicle. He moved to the driver's side door. The metal was cold. He registered it and kept moving because a first responder does not stop at an anomaly. A first responder catalogs the anomaly and continues the protocol, and the protocol was to assess the driver. The driver was deceased. He registered that too, with the trained steadiness of a man who had seen it before, who knew what it looked like and what it required of him. He called it in, gave his location, his name, the nature of the incident. Began the documentation process while he waited. This is what you do. You secure the scene. You document. You wait for the people whose job the next part is. It was while he was waiting, standing beside the vehicle in the dark with his flashlight, that he began to notice the other things. No steam. A freshly wrecked engine in cool night air produces steam from the cooling system, from the heat differential between the metal and the atmosphere. There was none. He checked the exhaust. Cold. He looked at the tire marks on the slope above him, tracing the car's path down. They were not fresh. The mud at the edges had dried and partially crusted in a way that takes hours, not minutes. He put his hand on the hood again. Cold, not cooling. Cold. He looked at the driver and understood, with the clinical eye of someone who had spent 11 years reading bodies at scenes, that what he was looking at was not a person who had just died. The color, the temperature, the specific quality of stillness that separates the recently deceased from those who have been gone for a while. He knew the difference. He had learned it in a way that does not leave you. This person had not died in the last few minutes. He was still standing there with this information, trying to find a place to put it, when the state police arrived. 2 units. He briefed the first officer on scene the way he had been trained to brief, sequentially, and without editorializing. Witnessed the vehicle leave the road at 9:45 p.m., descended the embankment, found the driver deceased. He listed his observations about the temperature of the engine, the condition of the tire marks, the state of the body. The officer listened, wrote, asked him to wait by his rig while they processed the scene. He waited 40 minutes. When the investigating officer came back up the embankment and approached him, there was something in the man's posture that he recognized. Not discomfort exactly. The specific way a person carries information, they are not sure how to deliver. He had worn that posture himself on doorsteps, in waiting rooms, in the fluorescent hallways of rural hospitals at 2 a.m. The officer told him plainly, based on body temperature and the condition of the engine and the environmental exposure of the scene, the medical examiner's preliminary assessment placed the time of death at 5 to 7 hours prior to discovery. He did the arithmetic that the officer was also doing. 5 to 7 hours prior to 9:45 p.m., 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock at the latest. He had driven this exact stretch, this exact bend at this exact location at 9:45 p.m., and he had watched, in the cone of his headlights, in real time, a car that had been at the bottom of that ravine since the afternoon slide off the road and go over the guardrail in front of him. He asked the officer to repeat the timeline. The officer repeated it. He stood on the shoulder of US 119 in the Kentucky mountains at 11 o'clock at night, and he looked at the bend in the road, and he tried to do what he had been doing his entire adult life, which is take the available evidence and build from it a picture of what occurred. This is the fundamental skill of emergency response. You do not arrive at a scene and feel it. You arrive at a scene and read it. You extract the facts, and the facts tell you the story, and the story tells you what to do next. The facts were, a car had left this road in the afternoon. A man had died in the afternoon. The car had been at the bottom of that ravine for 5 to 7 hours when he came around the bend at 9:45 p.m., and he had watched it happen. There is no framework that holds all of those facts at the same time. He knows this. He has tried to build one in the years since. In the quiet way, a methodical man tries to solve a problem that will not leave him alone. He has read what there is to read about temporal anomalies, about the documented cases of people witnessing events that the physical record places in the past, about the theoretical structures that might allow for such a thing. He is not a person who dismisses what he cannot explain. He is also not a person who reaches for an explanation that fits the feeling rather than the evidence. What he returns to consistently is this. The scene was cold when he arrived. The body was hours old. The tire marks in the mud had dried. Every physical indicator said this accident had happened in the afternoon. And yet he watched it happen at 9:45 p.m. from the cab of his rig, watched the overcorrection and the guardrail giving, and the headlights sweeping the trees, watched it with the full sensory presence of a man who was awake and sober and driving a road he knew intimately, which means either the physical evidence was wrong, or what he witnessed was not the accident. That second possibility is the one he cannot put down, because if what he saw was not the accident itself, then what his headlights found on that bend in the Kentucky mountains was something else entirely, a repetition, a residue, the road playing back something that had already happened, for reasons the road has not explained, and he has not been able to compel it to explain. He still drives the Appalachian routes, still takes US 119. He has come through that bend hundreds of times since, always at a reduced speed, always with his eyes on the guardrail at the second post, the one that was repaired after the accident and sits slightly different from the others, if you know what you are looking at. He has not seen it again, but he slows down there every time, not because he expects to, because 11 years of first response taught him that the scene always has more information than you extracted on the first pass. And he has not yet decided whether he has extracted everything that bend in the road has to tell him, or whether whatever he saw that night in November is still there somewhere, caught in a loop between the afternoon it happened and the 9:45 p.m. it found him, waiting for the right set of headlights to come around the curve and witness it one more time. The dogs were not barking. That was the wrong thing. That was the thing that made him slow down before he had a conscious reason to slow down, before his mind had caught up to what his body already understood, because he had made this delivery run dozens of times on this county road in northern Alabama, and he knew these dogs the way a regular traveler knows the landmarks of a familiar route, not by name, by behavior. The shepherd mix at the third property that came at the fence line every time without fail. The two hounds at the white farmhouse that announced his rig from a quarter-mile out. The old brown dog at the last property before the delivery address that barked exactly 3 times, always 3. Like a biological clock he could set his ETA against. He knew these dogs. They were not barking. He is 41 years old. Local delivery turned long haul, rural Tennessee and Alabama routes. A man who grew up in this region and carries that origin in the way people carry the specific literacy of the place that made them. He knows what a quiet country road sounds like at 11 p.m. in early April, and he knows what it sounds like when that quiet is wrong, when the silence has a texture that ordinary silence does not have, when the absence of something that should be present is louder than the thing itself would be. This silence was wrong from the moment he turned onto the county road. State Route 72 to the county road cutoff, a route he ran on a rotating schedule, deliveries to a handful of rural addresses spread across 6 miles of 2-lane blacktop that wound through low farmland and stands of pine, and the occasional creek bottom where the road dipped and the trees closed in overhead. He had been running this route long enough that it had stopped being a route and become something closer to a habit. Same turns, same landmarks, same dogs in the same yards announcing his passage the same way they always did. Tonight, none of them made a sound. He registered it somewhere in his peripheral awareness first, the way you register a missing step in a staircase you walk every day. A stumble of expectation rather than a conscious observation. By the time he reached the third property, and the shepherd was not at the fence, not barking. The awareness had moved from peripheral to direct, and he found himself slowing the rig without having made a decision to slow it. His headlights swept the third property as he rolled past at 20 miles an hour. The shepherd was in the yard, standing, facing south, ears flat against its skull, its whole body oriented with the fixed intensity of a dog that has identified something specific and is not yet certain what to do about it. Not barking, not growling, just standing and facing, with a stillness that looked less like calm and more like the thing that comes before a decision. He kept moving. The white farmhouse, the 2 hounds, both of them in the front yard side by side facing south. Same posture, ears flat, silent. He pulled his foot off the accelerator and let the rig coast. There are things you know if you grew up rural in the American South and have spent enough years driving its back roads at night. You know what deer in a field look like when they have caught a scent they cannot categorize. You know what a horse looks like when the weather is about to change in a way the barometer has not yet confirmed. You develop, whether you want to or not, a secondary literacy in animal behavior, a reading of the natural world that operates below the level of conscious analysis and surfaces as instinct or unease, or the specific physical sensation of needing to pay closer attention. Every animal instinct he had ever developed was firing simultaneously. He counted them as he rolled. 11 dogs across 9 properties, and every single one of them was standing in their yard facing the same direction, south. Not one barking, not one moving, just standing in the April dark, with their ears flat and their bodies oriented toward the south end of the county road, with the collective stillness of creatures that have agreed, without communication, on the location of something that concerns them all. He let the rig slow to a crawl. His headlights were reaching further south now, down the straight stretch toward the tree line at the end of the road. And that is when he saw what the dogs were looking at. The tree line sat maybe 200 yards ahead, a dense stand of pine that marked the southern boundary of the last property before the road, curved east toward his delivery address. At this distance, in his headlights, the tree line was a wall of dark with a slight variation in the density at its edge, where the outermost trees thinned before the darkness behind them thickened again. He had driven past this tree line 100 times. He knew its shape. He knew what it looked like in headlights. It looked different now. The variation at the edge was not trees, or not only trees. There was a cluster of shapes just inside the shadow line, right at the margin where his headlights reached, and then stopped. Figures standing in a loose group in the gap between the last of the illuminated trunks and the full dark beyond. He could not get a count because the shapes were partially occluded, and his depth perception at that range in that light was not reliable. But his estimate, in the seconds he had to make it, was 8 to 10, standing, not moving. Just present at the tree line the way the dogs were present in the yards, oriented toward the road, watching. He did not stop. His foot found the accelerator in the way that bypasses decision-making entirely, the way it had found it once before in Nevada, on a different night, with different figures. And he understood in the animal part of his brain that the 11 dogs on this road had been trying to tell him something for the last quarter mile. And he had just received the message. He turned around in a gravel driveway, a 3-point turn in a delivery rig on a narrow county road in the dark, which is not a fast process, which felt like the slowest process he had ever performed in his life. The rig swinging wide and correcting, and the headlights sweeping across the yards and the standing dogs. And for one long second pointing directly south down the road toward the tree line. And in that second he did not look. He had made a decision about what he was not going to look at, and he kept his eyes on the gravel driveway and completed the turn and drove north. He drove the county road back to Route 72 without looking in his mirrors. He did not make the delivery. His company received a complaint call the next morning from the customer. Missed delivery, no notification, no explanation left at the address. Standard complaint, the kind that generates paperwork and a conversation with his dispatcher about protocol. He sat through the conversation and said the right things, and then, because something in him needed to know, he called the customer himself. He told the customer he had attempted the delivery, said he had experienced some vehicle trouble on the county road and had to turn back, apologized for the inconvenience. Then he asked, as casually as he could arrange his voice to sound, whether anything unusual had happened near the property the previous night, whether the customer had noticed anything. The customer did not answer immediately. The pause was long enough that he thought the call had dropped, long enough that he pulled the phone from his ear and checked the screen to confirm it was still connected. Then the customer hung up. No goodbye, no response, just the call ending in the middle of the silence where an answer should have been. He has thought about that pause many times since. Not the hanging up, which he can construct explanations for, someone startled into a reflexive response, someone who did not want to engage with the question. The pause itself, the duration of it, the quality of it. Because in his experience, there are different kinds of pauses, and they carry different information. The pause of someone who does not know the answer. The pause of someone who is deciding how much of the answer to give. The pause of someone who knows exactly what you are asking, and is measuring the cost of confirming it. That pause had a specific weight to it. It was the pause of someone who had looked out their window the night before. He does not know what was at the tree line. He does not know what 8 to 10 figures in the shadow of a pine stand at 11:20 p.m. on a county road in northern Alabama signifies or represents or belongs to. He is not a man who has spent his years building theories about the rural dark and what it contains. He grew up in this region. He has driven its back roads for long enough to know that the country keeps its own counsel and reveals what it wants to reveal on its own schedule. What he knows is this: 11 dogs on 9 properties, animals that had announced his rig every single time he had run this road, went completely silent that night and turned themselves toward the southern tree line, with the unanimous conviction of creatures responding to a single stimulus. Not one of them barked. Not one of them moved toward the road or toward the thing they were watching. They stood in their yards with their ears flat and their bodies rigid. And they faced the same direction with the collective behavior of animals that have assessed something and reached a conclusion about it. Animals do not perform that behavior in the absence of a reason. He made a route change request the following week. Different delivery assignment, different roads. His dispatcher approved it without asking for a reason, which he found, in retrospect, either unremarkable or significant, depending on what he decided to believe about how much the people around him already knew. He still drives rural Alabama routes, different county roads. He does not avoid the region. He avoids the silence. The specific quality of a country road at night when the dogs have stopped barking, and something in the natural world has reached a consensus that it has not shared with you yet. When that silence arrives now, he does not slow down to read it. He has already learned what it means. There's a specific kind of alone that only exists on a 2-lane highway at 1 a.m. in the Texas Panhandle. Not lonely, not peaceful, just removed. Like the rest of the world forgot to include this stretch of road when it decided to keep existing. 49 years old, owner-operator, running Texas-Oklahoma freight for longer than some of my regular customers have been alive. I know these roads the way other men know their living rooms. Every dip, every curve, every exit that smells like cattle feed and diesel. I run irregular schedules on purpose. No patterns, no predictability. In this business, predictability is a liability. I learned that lesson young. What I didn't learn, what nobody teaches you, is that sometimes the road learns you back. It was January. Deep January. The kind where the Panhandle decides to remind you it's basically a flat extension of nowhere, and the wind has nothing stopping it for 300 miles in any direction. US 287 northbound, pushing toward the Oklahoma state line, somewhere around 1 a.m. Visibility was maybe 40 feet in either direction. Fog so thick, it didn't look like weather. It looked like the highway just ended, and the world beyond was something you had to take on faith. I'd driven in worse. I'd driven in a lot worse. I had my load, my schedule, my coffee, and 17 years of muscle memory, telling my hands what to do before my brain finished the thought. I noticed the rig about 2 hours in. Not dramatically. Not in any way that set off immediate alarm bells. Just a shape in my mirrors, back in the fog, holding distance. Running lights slightly wrong. Not off, not broken, just dimmer than they should have been, like someone had tuned them down on purpose. No company markings I could make out. No placards on the trailer. Could have been anyone. Plenty of independents run unmarked until they get their authority sorted. I noted it the way you note anything on an empty highway at that hour, with the particular half-conscious attention that keeps you alive without requiring your full focus. 400 yards back. Consistent. Not gaining, not falling behind. I kept driving. The thing about driving at night for long enough is you develop a second set of instincts. Not paranoia, something quieter than that. A background hum in your nervous system that registers patterns before your conscious mind writes the report. And somewhere around mile marker 140, that hum started talking, because the rig behind me had been back there for 60 miles. 60 miles of fog and empty highway, and it hadn't moved. Hadn't tried to pass, hadn't dropped back. 400 yards, consistent as a metronome, like it was tethered to me by something I couldn't see. I tested it. There was an exit coming up. No reason to take it. Nothing out there but a county road. And eventually a grain elevator that wouldn't be open for another 6 hours. I took it anyway. No signal. No brake lights warning, just a last-second turn. You can't do that in a passenger car. In a loaded rig, a last-second exit is a deliberate, committed act. I watched my mirrors. The rig followed. Not after a pause. Not after a hesitation that might suggest a coincidence or a driver who also happened to need that exit. Immediately. Like it already knew I was going to turn before I turned. I told myself it was nothing. Coincidence. Same delivery window, same general area. Guy probably knew the region and had his own reason for that road. I got back on the highway 12 miles later. The rig was there. Same distance. Same dimmed lights. Same nothing on the trailer sides. That background hum in my nervous system stopped being quiet. The next exit I took wasn't on any freight route. It was a farm road I knew from 15 years of running this corridor, the kind of road that exists on county maps and nowhere else, that goes to a particular family's property and then becomes a dirt track and then becomes a fence line. No GPS was routing anyone there. No dispatcher was sending a load down that road. The only reason to follow me onto that road was to follow me. The rig followed. I want you to understand what that means. What it means for a vehicle that size to follow you down a road with no logical freight purpose. In zero visibility fog. At 1:30 in the morning, maintaining exact distance. This wasn't someone going the same direction. This was someone going wherever I went. And the thing that moved from the back of my mind to the front, the thing I couldn't unfocus from, was that it never hesitated. Not at the highway exit, not at the farm road turn. Every move I made, it matched. Instantly, like it had a map of decisions I hadn't made yet. I started running roads from memory. Not routes, memories. A left on County Road 15 that I'd taken once in 2009 to help a driver who'd blown a tire. A bypass behind a grain co-op that I'd learned from a guy who doesn't drive anymore. Roads that had no reason to exist in anyone else's knowledge of this corridor. I was testing the outer limit of coincidence, trying to find the move that would break the pattern, that would let me tell myself I'd imagined it. Every turn, the rig followed. No hesitation. By 2 a.m. I was no longer running a route. I was running. The fog had thickened to the point where my own headlights were bouncing back at me. The world reduced to maybe 30 feet of visible road, and then white nothing, and somewhere in that white nothing, 400 yards back, something was following me with a patience that felt less like pursuit and more like certainty, like it wasn't chasing me because it already knew where I'd end up. That thought, that specific thought, was the one that made my hands go cold on the wheel. I made a decision. There's a 24-hour truck stop outside Amarillo, not a big chain, an independent, the kind that's been there since before I started driving. Always lit up, always a few rigs in the lot, always someone moving around the fuel islands. I knew exactly how to get there. I didn't signal, didn't change speed until the last possible moment, and pulled in hard under the brightest cluster of overhead lights near the fuel pumps. And I sat there, engine running, every light on, watching the highway through the truck stop entrance. The rig passed on US 2 and 87 about 90 seconds later. It slowed as it reached the exit. Not a full brake, just a reduction in speed, the kind that means something inside the cab is making a decision. Then it kept going. I watched its tail lights until the fog swallowed them. I sat under those fuel island lights for 40 minutes before I got out of my cab. I walked the outside of my trailer in the cold, the way you do after a hard run. Checking straps, checking seals, looking for anything the road might have done to the load. When I got to the rear passenger corner of the trailer, I stopped. There was a hole in the metal, clean-edged, roughly the size of a large fist, punched through the trailer wall from the outside. The metal was bent inward. Whatever had made it had been moving from outside the trailer to the inside. Not a rock strike, not road debris, not structural failure. The edges were too clean. The angle was too deliberate. It had been made by something that was pressed against the outside of my trailer. At some point during those 2.5 hours in the fog, something had been close enough to my trailer to do that. Not 400 yards back. Not following at a distance. Right there. I filed a report with the weight station on my way into Oklahoma the next morning. Gave them my location data, my rough timeline, my description of the unmarked rig. The officer who took my statement wrote everything down, asked a few follow-up questions, and then told me, without looking up from his notepad, that they'd had 2 other reports from that corridor in the past 3 weeks. Different drivers, same description. Unmarked rig, no placards, running lights slightly dimmed, following behavior that suggested foreknowledge of route. He said they hadn't been able to identify the vehicle. He said both of the other drivers had reported it on nights with low visibility. He said one of them had also found damage to their trailer. He didn't describe what kind. I run irregular schedules for a reason. No patterns, no predictability. I told you that at the start. What I think about now, when I'm planning a run, when I'm choosing my departure window and my routing, is that somewhere out there, something is also running irregular, also avoiding patterns, also staying unpredictable, and it is so much better at it than I am. 64 years old, retired now. I want to be precise about that word, retired. People use it like it means finished, completed, moved on to the next chapter. For most drivers I know, retirement means they hit their number, hung up their logbook, maybe bought a boat. For me, retirement means I stopped. Not gradually, not because my knees gave out, or my eyes got bad, or my wife finally convinced me the road wasn't worth it anymore. I stopped because of one night on the Bonneville Salt Flats in late June, at 2:10 in the morning. And I have not been behind the wheel of anything larger than a pickup truck since. 12 years. I want you to understand that I ran I-80 coast to coast for over 2 decades. I love that road the way some men love a person, and something happened on it that cost me everything I felt for it, permanently, in a single hour. I'll tell you what I saw. I'll tell you exactly what I saw, in the order I saw it, and I'll let you do with it whatever helps you sleep. It was late June, deep desert night, the kind where the temperature has finally dropped from brutal to merely uncomfortable, and the sky is so clear and so full of stars that the horizon looks lit from below. The salt flats are unlike anywhere else on I-80. 35 miles of absolute nothing, and I mean that literally, geometrically. No exits, no structures, no trees, no rises, no features. Just flat white salt in every direction, and the highway running through the middle of it like someone drew a line and dared the emptiness to argue. I'd run this stretch hundreds of times. I knew it. I respected it, the way you respect something that has no interest in you whatsoever. 2:10 a.m. Headlights reaching maybe 300 feet ahead. No other vehicles in either direction. I'd checked. Habit. The kind of check that becomes involuntary after enough night miles. She was standing on the shoulder. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know what your brain just did. It reached for an explanation. Car trouble ahead, out of frame. Family pulled over somewhere dark. A rest stop I was misremembering. Your brain is doing exactly what mine did in the first half second. Running through the exits, the logical doors, the ways this could be ordinary. I need you to stay with me through what comes next, because I spent 12 years trying every one of those doors, and none of them open. No car. No debris field. No skid marks, no flares, no luggage. Nothing that precedes a child standing on a highway shoulder at 2 a.m. She was maybe 8 years old. White dress, and this detail has stayed with me every single day since. Clean, not road dirty, not travel wrinkled. Clean, like it had just been put on, no shoes. Standing on salt that reflects cold like a mirror, and she had no shoes. No light source for miles in either direction except my headlights, which were now finding her. And she was just standing there. Not flagging, not waving, not reacting to 40,000 pounds of truck bearing down on her out of the dark. I stopped because she was a child. That's the whole calculus. Everything else, the location, the hour, the impossible logistics of how she'd gotten there, none of it overrode the single fact that she was a child alone on a highway in the dark. I stopped. I put on my hazards, and before I had finished setting the brake, before I had fully processed what I was going to say or do, the passenger door opened and she climbed up. Not knocked. Not waited. Opened the door and climbed into the cab the way a child climbs into a familiar vehicle, with the particular confidence of someone who has done this before and expected to be let in. She sat down, hands in her lap, looking forward through the windshield at the dark highway ahead. I asked her if she was okay. She didn't respond. I asked if she was hurt. Nothing. I asked where her parents were, and here is the first place I felt it. That specific wrongness that your body registers before your mind catches up. She didn't look at me. Not away from me. Not avoiding me. Just forward. Like I wasn't the relevant part of the situation. Like we were both simply waiting for something to happen next. I pulled back onto the highway because I didn't know what else to do. I was going to get to the next exit, get to a gas station, call highway patrol. That was the plan. That was the only plan that made sense. She didn't speak for 22 miles. I know the exact distance because I was watching my odometer, watching for the exit, counting down the miles, the way you count down anything unbearable. 22 miles of silence from a child sitting 18 inches to my right, hands folded, eyes forward, in a clean white dress with no shoes at 2 a.m. on the emptiest highway in the American West. I turned on the cab radio at some point. I don't remember deciding to. Just suddenly it was on, low, because the silence had become something I needed to fill. She didn't react to it. Didn't react to anything. Then she spoke. She said the name of the exit. The specific exit coming up. Not a major interchange. Not a numbered junction most drivers would know by name. A small local exit with a name that means something only to people from that part of Utah. She said it quietly, like she was reminding me of something I already knew. 5 seconds before my headlights found the green sign in the dark and confirmed it. I felt the cab go cold. Not temperature. Something else. That particular cold that lives behind your sternum when your nervous system knows something your vocabulary hasn't caught up to yet. I took the exit. Found a gas station, one of those small all-night places with fluorescent lights that make everything look slightly unreal. I pulled in, set the brake, and turned to ask her name. The seat was empty. I want to be a precise man about this. I was a first responder before I drove. I am not someone who is casual with facts or prone to catastrophizing details. So I will tell you the facts as I confirmed them in the following minutes. I had not stopped the truck between the salt flats and that gas station. I had not slowed below 55 miles per hour. The passenger door had a cab alarm, the kind that sounds when the door opens while the vehicle is in motion. That alarm had not triggered once since she got in. The door was closed and latched. The seat was empty and there was nothing on it. No impression in the vinyl. No warmth, no scuff from shoes that didn't exist anyway. I got out of the cab. I walked around it. I checked underneath. I stood in the parking lot of that gas station at 2:30 in the morning, and I tried to find a version of the last hour that I could live with. I called Highway Patrol from the gas station payphone. I gave them my location, my direction of travel, the description, 8 years old, white dress, no shoes, salt flat shoulder, mile marker I'd noted out of habit when I first saw her. They sent a unit to the location. 2 officers walked the shoulder. They found footprints in the salt, small, bare, child-sized. They followed them back from where I'd stopped, back 200 yards along the shoulder, back toward the dark, empty nothing in the direction I'd come from. And then the prints stopped. Not faded. Not obscured. Stopped. As if she had been walking, and then simply began existing in a different place. No disturbance in the salt behind the last print. No explanation for where 200 yards of walking had originated from. The prints began in the middle of open ground, the way a sentence begins in the middle of a page. Without a first word, without a source. No child matching her description was reported missing in that region. Not that week, not that month. I checked. I kept checking for years, the way you keep pressing a bruise. Not because you want it to hurt, but because you need to confirm it's still real. Nothing. No missing child, no explanation, no follow-up from Highway Patrol beyond a report number, and a case that was quietly closed for lack of actionable information. I drove my load to its destination the next morning, filed my paperwork, called my dispatcher, went through every motion of a normal day with the specific, deliberate care of a man performing normalcy, because the alternative was coming apart in a truck stop parking lot in Nevada. I never took another load. I've thought about why, in 12 years of thinking about it, and the closest I can get to honest is this. It wasn't the fear. Drivers live with strange things. You file them away. You keep moving. Because that's what the road asks of you. What I couldn't file away was the sorrow. Because whatever she was, wherever she came from, however she existed in that cab for 22 miles, she was a child. She sat with her hands in her lap. She looked forward. She told me the name of the exit, in a voice so quiet it sounded like something worn thin from long use. And when I turned to ask her name, she was already gone, like she'd been gone for a long time before I ever saw her. 11 drivers, 11 roads, 11 nights that changed something permanent in the people who lived them. Here on Deep Fears, we don't chase the dramatic, we sit with the real, the quiet, unresolvable things that stay with you long after the headlights go dark. If these stories found you tonight, share them with someone who drives at night. They'll know exactly why. Drive safe and watch your mirrors.